Kendra with True S TV, and I'm back with another video. Now, I was thinking, and I had to try to make this video a little short. I'm trying to break down information in such a way, right, that it's going to be quick. So let me try this. So I was thinking about the segregation in America coupled with the deportation of immigrants. And I started thinking, I was on a video the other day on a live, and I was watching this live. It was a black woman who did the live, and she was just, doing a video about the protesting that was going on for the Spanish immigrants, a lot of the immigrants that's being deported to their country. And one of the topics that came up in her comment section was their problem was not deportation in itself, right? A lot of people problem was not that these people were being deported back to their country after being in America, especially them being illegal immigrants. A lot of people were not mad at the deportation of illegal immigrants, but was mad at the due process. They are saying that what is upsetting them is the due process. It is not, they're not giving due process before they deport these immigrants. Right? And so I started thinking, and it made me think of something Dane Calloway said a couple of years ago, where he was letting us know, I don't know if it was the Biden administration he was talking about, where he was like, they're going to have new classifications for black people, where they're going to try to call you African diaspora or something, and they were going to try to change classification as a way to deport black folk. And I started thinking, if they're not doing due process, right, where they are going through genealogical records to find out whether or not a person belongs to America or how they gain their citizenship, they can deport a so-called African American, a so-called black person. And what is a black person but a reclassification of the American Indian due to the 1924 Racial Integrity Act? Because we know that African American was not presented until 1988, right? And so this made me think, I don't know, it gave me an epiphany. I feel like this is a trial run. And I'm glad we're not protesting, because I feel like the protesting that they wanted black people to do was so that they can declare martial law, so they can take a whole group of black people and deport them to a country, imprison them first, right? And then deport them to a country they do not belong to, and that is Africa, right? And so I feel like with segregation happening, right, which is a good thing, but with this deportation without due process, you have to start looking at this with a fine-tooth comb, because history repeats itself, right? And remember, they tried to get rid of their black problem before through deportation. They lied and came up with a fictitious Pan-African story, and that's how Liberia, a country in Africa that is an American country in Africa, that's how Liberia was founded, through sending American Indian people, so-called black people, right, reclassified, and sending them to Africa, right? And that is how they were getting rid of their Negro problem in America then. History is repeating itself, and now the influx of white settlers, right, bringing in the Afrikaners, right, to increase white population, while simultaneously through expelling, right, black people through fictitious identity or classification of African American, they are going to be deporting black people to lower the black population, right? So that when they inflict any type of pain or fighting or any type of war on you, your number is decreased and their number is increased. So that came into mind when I heard about the deportation of immigrants without due process and the segregation. I had to think of, where in history has this happened before, right? Simultaneously. And then it was an increase of police brutality, lynchings, stealing of black lands. Well, they already got the land now. Now they just don't want to give it back, right? and the changing of identity, right? And so we have to be vigilant, right? And understand that this whole immigrant deportation thing is a trial run, right? And now that they got immigrants speaking out about it, and saying, no, our problem isn't that you're deporting us, it's the due process, right? You're not allowing us to come in and substantiate where we have become American citizens, or that we have been here for a decade doing the right thing on the up and up. We're on the straight arrow. We've been working, opening businesses and taking care of our family. We think we have a right, or we should have the right, as citizens of America, even if we have an expired visa, we should have the right, especially if we have not committed any acts of violence, terrorism, or breaking the law in any way. We should have the right, due to what we've done, to be legalized in America. And so, because they're not going through the due process by verifying whether or not a person is an Aboriginal to America or came illegally, that's where the problem lies. So I'm saying all that to say is, when we check off African American, we're saying we're immigrants. But if they're not doing due process, see, if they do due process when they are expelling these immigrants from America, if they do due process, and they will open up a can of worms if they start trying to deport black people and do due process. So my reasoning for why they're not doing due process is because when they start to try to get rid of black people, it will open up a can of worms of who we really are. And if anybody knows, based on what Senator Benson said, you would know we're Aboriginals to America, and you would be expelling Aboriginals to a different country, as they did in Liberia, right? So due to that is the reason why I believe they're not doing due process. This trial run is to see if anybody was going to be in open arms about the concern of immigrants being deported without due process. And it was also to see if black people would protest, so that they can use that as a way to declare martial law. Why do you think he was so quick to declare martial law over black people in America? Oh, we're going to because black people say they want police. No, we don't. I'm trying to help them. They don't want to get robbed. What are you talking about? We go to stores every day and don't get robbed. What are you talking about? In black neighborhoods. What are you talking about? And so they wanted to use our protesting as a way to deport us, like as a way to say, all right, we're going to incarcerate these people, right? And then we're not going to give them due process. We're going to deport this group of people, and we're going to send them to a country that don't belong to them. That's what happened when they had this Negro problem, as they called it before, in the late 1800s. What did they do? That's how Liberia was founded, right? You got a American country in Africa. How so? You took Americans and put them in Africa with a fictitious lie of that being their origin, right? But if you do due process, one would find out, oh, these are all Aboriginals of America. Even some of the black Europeans that allied and made it with them, they still have bloodline, right? 98% of them have the blood of an Aborigine. So that is, my little spiel on segregation, which is a good thing, coupled with the deportation of immigrants. And it made me think, as they start this process of removing immigrants, simultaneously, while understanding that once you segregate, it would be a pay cut for white businesses. Now you have to establish your own footing, which means that's why I see certain areas where I'm from being built up and renewed. They're having to open more business, more factories, nursing homes and things, because who worked a lot of these things? Black people and immigrants. Right? But if we're in the business of deporting people, and then we're going from the Spanish, and then pretty soon we're going to go into black folk, right? We know that that's a progression that we're just waiting on, because we already saw this coming, right? So now especially if we're not going to do due process. So right now, what people are protesting is due process. They want due process. That is what these immigrants are saying. We want due process. We want to prove our origins. We want to prove how we got here and why we should stay. You know, like people who did come illegally and got their citizenship. Because they're not just deporting people. They're deporting people who've been on visas that expired. Right? But these people haven't committed any criminal acts. Right? And so, and they've been on the up and doing good. They got well-established business and now they're being deported. And so, that is what's being in question, is due process. And all I'm saying is, black people, we got to understand that this is a trial run, because under the so-called fictitious label of African American, they can call you an immigrant. And if they don't give dual process, you have to do genealogical research, right? For dual process, you have to do genealogical research, which I did on my family, right? So I got evidence of my family being here really early in the Americas in the early 1600s. I got my family that traced back only to America. And so y'all gonna have to do a lot of genealogical research, and y'all better start before they start closing stuff up, because they are not trying to do due process. And that was what this is from what I heard through the grapevine, that what people are protesting is that due process is not being done, and they're not allowing immigrants to prove their citizenship. They're just deporting them. Well, all I'm saying is, if they calling you African American and they're not doing due process, they're going to ship you to a country that you do not belong to, or a continent you do not belong to. So you be careful when you think that this does not apply to us. It does. And this was just me giving my little spiel. This is Kendra with Trust TV. Comment down below if you agree. If you got any comments below, any questions, we can have this whole conversation. I'll never go live, but maybe we can go live. You know what I mean? But do you believe what I'm saying? Do you believe that them not doing due process is a way for them to not allow people to substantiate their nationality here in America? And without that due process, it leaves them open to deporting people who are not immigrants, such as people who are labeled or reclassified as African American, right? Who were previously labeled as black in the 1924 Racial Integrity Act and were originally considered American Indian, right? So I'm just putting it out there, you know, a little food for thought. This is Kendra with Trust TV. Like, share, and subscribe. Stay up, stay blessed, put God first above all else. Peace out. Bye.